This is B.R. McDonald from the Veteran Artist Program and host of the brand new VAP podcast. You are listening to the Veteran Resource Podcast with my good friend, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 9 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris, and today we have a great episode for you with Drew Cameron of Combat Paper. I had the experience of seeing Combat Paper being made in person, and it was really cool to see this very unique and very creative art form. During the intro of this episode, you heard B.R. McDonald. He's the founder of the Veteran Artist Program and the amazing host of the VAP podcast that just launched this week. He's interviewing some very talented veteran artists, and you're definitely going to want to check that out after this podcast, of course. But after this podcast is done, go ahead and head over to vappodcast.com/iTunes. That's VAP podcast.com/iTunes, and make sure you subscribe to that. BR has some really talented guests on there. You're going to want to listen. All right, let me get into some of the reviews that I got. Sweeney McMahon says, "Energy to burn. This podcast will help energize any veteran that's trying to find a path to the future in business or life at large. Great takeaways." And Denny Crahy says, "Great show. What a great value for all veterans out there. Keep up the great work, Jeremy." And Smita at Womenpreneurs Success says, "Wonderful podcast. Such a needed and wonderful resource to veterans. Jeremy is doing a great service." I absolutely love seeing reviews like these. Thank you very much. If you have not left a review, I invite you to go to veteranpodcast.com/iTunes, and you can leave a review there, and you'll be able to hear it at the beginning of a future episode. All right, let's get back to Drew Cameron and Combat Paper. Drew Cameron is a second-generation hand papermaker, trained forester, and former Army soldier. He co-founded Combat Paper Project and has been facilitating workshops with veterans and the community in which they transform military uniforms into handmade paper, prints, books, and art since 2007. The portable workshop has reached thousands of people throughout the country in 29 states and more than 125 workshops. His work is represented in 33 public collections and has been shown numerous times, including at the Corcoran Gallery, the Courtauld Institute, Library of Congress, Museum of Contemporary Craft, and Craft and Folk Art Museum, among others. Combat Paper is now operating in 4 locations: New York, New Jersey, Nevada, and California, with open and ongoing programming. Drew is based in San Francisco at Shotwell Paper Mill and continues to practice papermaking, teach, and encourage others to do the same. All right, well, let's jump right into the interview with Drew. Welcome, Drew, to the Veteran Resource Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was pretty excited to have you on. This is a pretty cool thing that you're doing with Combat Paper. I wanted to find out more about your backstory, but before I do, can you give a brief explanation of exactly what Combat Paper is?
Yeah, sure enough. Combat Paper, in its simplest form, is based on workshops where veterans and the community come together to transform military uniforms into handmade paper.
Oh, cool. All right. Now we'll get back into that a little bit more, but before we do, I wanted to find out more about you, Drew. Going back to your early life, tell me about that. Where did you grow up?
Well, I come from the military class. So I grew up in the Air Force. My dad's a career Air Force officer. And so, moved around the United States growing up. Mostly came of age in Iowa. And that's where I enlisted when I graduated high school. Like many of us in this country, I would say all of us in this country are connected to the military. Some closer than others, whether it's direct service or a family member or a friend or a neighbor or what have you. I mean, we all can think about these various ways that we're connected to it. But in my family, we have lots of examples of people serving through the generations, lots of people going way back. So, the way I've been thinking about it is I come from the military class. And what I mean by that is I was born in the military, raised in the military, and served in the military myself. So still, for most of my life, I've either been dependent or serving in the armed forces.
And did you always know that you were going to go into the military?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. But I graduated high school in 2000, grew up in this town that I didn't really want to be in anymore. And I got the phone calls from the recruitment offices, and it sounded like a really good opportunity. So I took the plunge and enlisted into the Army active duty for a field artillery position. So, that's what I ended up being a part of.
So you went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, is that correct?
That's the one. Yeah, my duty station was Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I was a 13 Mike, which is multiple launch rocket systems crew member. And I did 4 years of active duty there and a tour of duty in the war in Iraq in 2003. So we were sent over as part of the second wave.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was my first duty assignment when I went from reserves to active duty. I spent a few years over at Fort Sill.
Oh, right on. That's great. Yeah.
Not a bad place.
I was only there because they told me I had to be. Yeah.
I like the heat.
It's the desert prairie, man. It's okay.
I saw that you had a degree in forestry. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, I used my benefits that that were allowable. I committed my time in service to the military and was discharged under honorable conditions. So they gave me access to an education, which I used. And I got my bachelor's of science in forestry from the University of Vermont directly after leaving my time in active duty. Simultaneous, I served in the National Guard for a couple of years as well during that time. So my training is in natural resources, forest ecology, and I also have emphasis on political and human geography, also from the University of Vermont. Those are my minors.
And did you pursue art at all while you were in the military?
I basically have been in art school since I was born, I imagine. I grew up in a very creative family and have always been encouraged to make things, whether it be something from like wrenching a car or building a house or fixing a roof or throwing a pot or making a sculpture or making a sheet of paper, as it were.
Wow. Quite the artist. You were creating paper long before you ever started combat paper. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So my paper lineage goes back to Iowa. My father got his master's in art education after he retired from the Air Force, so he could go teach art to public schools. During this time, he studied at the University of Iowa Center for Book and Paper. He learns papermaking and brings it home and teaches me. So this is in the 90s. Then I graduate high school, I go off to the Army, and when I come home from the war, I move to Vermont to go to school. And it's there that I meet another papermaker. And so my practice is reactivated upon leaving the active duty. So I work with this person and dive into an apprenticeship in their paper mill and in their practice, picking up a lot of the skills that they had learned up to that point, and then also beginning to find my own practice. So it's through the doing and the making of paper that all of these other projects evolve. It's just basically learn by doing. I very much believe in that philosophy and that approach to things, is have a good mentorship that can point you in the right directions, give you some tutorials, but basically you're going to find your own language in it if you just practice.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that you could learn anything that you want to, as long as you practice hard enough.
Right on. Right.
So you were working in this paper mill and you hadn't started combat paper yet. What made you decide to take the next step?
Right. The thing about papermaking is it's a very ancient practice. So we're talking about 2,000 years of history here. Right around the mid-8th century, the development of using textiles or clothing rags specifically for the purpose of making paper comes about. So Now there's another good 1,300 years of papermaking practice in rags. So I'm studying this ancient craft. Inevitably, when studying this craft, one asks what type of rags will make what type of paper. For instance, if I took my old blue jeans and made them into paper, what would that look like? If I took old t-shirts or tablecloths, or what would it be like if I took my uniform and rendered it into paper? So with that impetus between my mentor and I took the plunge, I guess it were, and I took my uniform that I had worn in Iraq and I put it on and I cut it off of my body and I made paper from it, with the intent of basically just giving it away. So that summer of 2007, as I was traveling on my first road, cross-country road trip that I'd always dreamed of doing, I was giving away paper to my other friends and veterans that I met along the way. And quickly what happened is people asked if they could make paper from their uniforms as well, or if I would show them how to make paper from their uniforms. And of course I said yes. So beginning in the fall of that same year, I had active duty, National Guard, and recently returned veterans primarily coming to my studio in Vermont and making paper for the intent of making paper together with their uniforms. And so it just kind of grew in this very, informal, organic way into what it is now, which is based on facilitating and providing workshops with communities and veterans across the country. And that's been the past 8 years of our growth, I guess.
Wow. Drew, can you walk me through the process of creating paper?
Yeah, totally. So the first step in making paper is you have to find your fiber, whatever that may be. Most of us think of paper and we think of trees. This is true, although that technology didn't come about until 1850. So prior to that, we have a bunch of different fibers we can look to: cotton, hemp, linen. You can even go out and harvest wild fibers that grow on the landscape close to where you live, such as milkweed, hosta, lilac, cattail. So you gather your fiber and then you begin to cut it up. So with the military uniform, we begin to deconstruct it. We take apart the Velcro and the buttons and the zippers and all of the non-fiber. Those get separated and removed. Then we take the fiber of the material and cut it down into smaller pieces, maybe like the size of a thumbnail or something around there. That cut up material is then added with water into a machine that's called a Hollander beater. Now, the Hollander beater is really appropriately named because it describes where it was invented in 1680, Holland, and what it does: beats rags to a pulp. So we take this material, put it inside of the Hollander beater, and using pressure, water, and time, it circulates the fiber-water mixture through this oval vat, beating it, breaking the weave of the fiber, breaking the threads all the way down to the individual pulp. That's what becomes our material that we can then use to render into sheets of paper. So once the beating cycle is complete, that rendered pulp is put inside of a vat with more water again, and then we use a simple screen. It's a screen with a wooden frame on it. It's called a mold, and then there's a top piece. It's called a decal. With the mold and decal, we can draw it into the pulp slurry that's inside of the vat, almost like fishing. You're capturing the fiber, and then it allows the water to pass through. So that's now you've formed a sheet of paper. Then from there, the sheets are pressed onto a felt, and you can create a series of these layers throughout the day: felt, paper, building a huge post. Then that post is pressed, peeled apart, and then hung to dry like laundry. So it's very simple, and again, it mimics this very ancient practice, this pre-industrial practice. So it's very accessible. One can get into the steps pretty easily. And that's, in essence, the basics of forming sheets of paper from rags. Now, one of the things that we employ in combat paper is the power of print and the power of book. So paper can be activated in a number of different ways, to include these two methods. So with creative writing and bookbinding, then a further examination of the story of the fiber can be had through creative writing workshops. These inspired by warrior writers, most definitely. Then also with the printmaking, which is one of my particular favorites, there's a lot of different ways that we can explore, again, the content that's in the fiber. In workshops, we use this stencil printing method called pulp printing. which allows participants to take images from a library or perhaps images that they themselves have from their time in service and print those images onto paper made from their uniforms, giving this sort of holistic component to their service, their time, their commemoration of it, and their whatever their interest is in sharing it. So there's a lot of different ways that people can access it, but again, it just mimics this ancient craft and adds this contemporary complexity of people's sort of geography and memory and experiences in the military, all then put into something as innocuous as a sheet of paper.
That's amazing. And that Hollander beater, how long does the fiber need to sit in there and work its way through? How long is that process?
Well, it's a very active process. I mean, the beater is loud. It's spinning. I mean, imagine this sort of oval trough, almost like a racetrack, and then the fiber is being beaten underneath this roll, which is a series of flat metal bars. So it's loud. It's hammering it as it's going through this. But the beating cycle is variant, depending. This is where one has complete control in the process. The longer one beats it, the different type of fiber and paper one can make, as well as the different type of fiber can make a different paper. So I'll give you an example. If we were to take cotton rag and we were to take hemp rag and we were to beat those and then make paper, they'd be very different because the fiber qualities are different. So in the workshop sense, for our purposes of making paper that'll be good and versatile in its application, we're talking about maybe an hour and a half to go through a beating cycle to beat one load. One load is maybe 1.5 pounds of fiber, the dry weight of fiber. So one uniform maybe is in the neighborhood of 3 pounds. So that can be like 2 to 3 loads in the Hollander beater, which can render somewhere in the neighborhood between 60 and 100 sheets of paper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a ton of fiber trapped inside of clothing.
That's far more than I thought there would be.
Oh, yeah. Yep, it's totally possible.
Having the finished product of the paper is just really the beginning, because then you end up doing something with it, whether that be creating art on it or making a book out of it or writing a poem or something like that.
Yeah. For me, the process is the art form. Whenever I think about this workshop, whenever I think about combat paper, for me, it's always about the making of paper. That's the really amazing thing to me. People come together, oftentimes strangers, and we go through this process together. And that in and of itself is a beautiful art form. I find it really, really a great space to be in. I'm completely inspired by it. I really love it. But the artifacts are also important because they can act as a way to tell the story further for folks who weren't in the workshop. So that's why we employ book arts and print art as a means to, again, further activate the paper.
I was curious about that, if there was a mental aspect to this as well. It could kind of bring out different emotions, taking your BDUs, something that was so much a part of you for so long, and turning it into pulp. I imagine that would be in and of itself very therapeutic.
To each their own. Yeah, I mean, it's an open forum in that sense. The workshops are most certainly facilitated to be positive. It's a way for people to come together, learn something new, and make something, which is great and creative. And what agency or what leverage point somebody wants to bring to that? Is it about a comrade? Is it about a loved one? Is it just about like, hey, this was 8 years of my youth? Or was, depending on whichever angle somebody wants to bring to it, it's completely up to them. And I would say for the past 8 years, combat paper has done the work, really traveling across the country, 29 states now, over 125 workshops. The work is in 34 collections. There have been thousands of people who have participated, veterans and the community coming together. So it's a huge spectrum of experience that has come and brought in their intention to this process. There have been representatives from every branch of military service and every major conflict the United States has been involved with since and including World War II, all the way up to ongoing conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's a huge, huge, huge breadth, right? So to say that it is this or it is not this is very difficult for me. I'm more interested in what people want it to be for themselves. They'll come and speak to it as how is relevant to their lives and why they made the decision to want to be in a workshop and make paper together. So it's really, that's what I come back to each their own. I'm not interested in categorizing the experience for anyone but myself.
One of the things that I saw when I was trying to research a little bit more about combat paper was a video that had Eli Wright in it, and a quote that he said that I'm pulling from the video. He said, "It's about letting it outside of me, and then I can carry it around. Should I choose to in this physical form, but it's not trapped inside me anymore."
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really, really poignant. I mean, Eli and our friendship and our working collaboration goes back to the beginning of combat paper. So he's been on board with the project since he was still active duty in the Army. And he is also one of the key facilitators for Combat Paper New Jersey. So we have 4 paper mills now between California, Nevada, New York, and New Jersey that use the process, that carry the namesake and do workshops and programming in their own communities as they see relevant. So we're in cahoots. We're all affiliated, but we're kind of in this group effort. Eli being one of the key facilitators for the Combat Paper New Jersey, and I know that his work is ongoing for sure. So it's pretty great. I mean, it's an amazing thing to be a part of a veteran organization that emphasizes art practice, because we do a lot of really, we get these really amazing experiences together, making new work. And so that's one of the things that our vision has evolved to, is now we're coming together for these residencies specifically internally, as facilitators, as artists and working artists, to make new work together. And I'm just couldn't be more thrilled about that, recent development.
That's great. You said you have how many different locations affiliated?
So Combat Paper, there are 4 affiliated paper mills. So I'm based in California, sort of as through Combat Paper. And then people that I've trained and that I've met and that I've worked with and developed a trust and a vision with over years, they've also developed their own practice. And those are Combat Paper New Jersey, Combat Paper New York, Combat Paper Nevada.
Oh, okay. Great. You say that you're primarily doing workshops. Are there any other programs that you have, or is it strictly workshops?
Well, my own art practice is, facilitating these workshop programs all across the country, in the Bay Area where I live, and then also outside of the state on occasion, for sure. Then I also have a studio practice. So I create a lot of print and conceptual art and installation art. And I'm emphasizing, some collaborations, but I'm really emphasizing a lot of prints lately. That's been my main choice, my main media that I'm most excited about. The type of prints that I'm doing, 2 main projects right now, one about World War I, and that's ongoing as we commemorate the 100 years since the beginning, and then coming up in 2018 will be the end armistice of the Great War. There's a lot of us. There's so much for us to discover and consider. So I've been doing more research and more work around that. But it started with this project called Beyond Zero, 1914 to 1918, which is a collaboration with the Kronos Quartet. So I teamed up with the filmmaker, composer, and the quartet, and I was able to produce a series of prints to accompany this piece for string quartet with film called Beyond Zero, 1914 to 1918. And the next project is on Vietnam. And it's, there's a lot of things that are happening around, commemorative days and years. So this is 50 years since the beginning of the major ground war escalation in Vietnam. Lots to consider around that as well. So the project that'll be coming out this fall is a series of prints around My Lai, as remembered through Hugh Thompson, who was the helicopter pilot who had witnessed it. I don't know if you recall that story. It's sort of a lesser known component. But that's one of the next projects that I'm working on. So again, just like really emphasizing printmaking. And then on occasion, depending if commissions or collaborations come about, publishing books has been, a really exciting thing that I've gotten involved in through this practice as well. And so we'll see where it goes. Hopefully some more shows coming up, because we're rounding out near 10 years.
Wow.
It'll be 10 years pretty soon that combat paper has existed. So we're in the planning stages for some big events around it.
That went by pretty quick, didn't it?
I don't know, man. It feels like a whole lifetime. I got to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When I think about before combat paper, it feels like a lifetime ago.
All different chapters.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just this work has enabled me to travel in a way that I never really saw possible. So I've had amazing opportunities and worked with really, really wonderful mentors and seen and experienced some amazing collections and archives and of artwork and been inspired by the stories and the pieces that have been created by those who've collaborated with combat paper. And so it's just been this very, very, very filled 8 years. So, I mean, I'm excited for 8 more. Shoot, let's do it.
Speaking of which, what do you have lined up for the future of combat paper?
We're like in the immediate future, we have, so the workshop programming is ongoing. And because we have 4 paper mills, sometimes we have simultaneous workshops around the country, which is super exciting. So for instance, there'd be like, I was doing this residency and workshop in Portland, and there was something happening in DC at the same time, which just gets me like charged, to feel like, again, I'm part of something that's bigger than myself, just like I was in the military, I'm part of this bigger effort. And that's really cool. But the residencies, that's a big change for us, a development. So where we as facilitators and as key members are coming together to create work, to inspire each other and create new work in residency situation with each other. That's another, the exhibition coming up for the 10 years, probably producing a book for that project, which would be really great. That's all stuff kind of happening right now. I mean, I have a studio practice that I'd like to continue. I mean, that's been a really great asset over the years, is to be able to synthesize some of that touring component and come back to the studio and make work, make new work, make paper. So I'd like to continue to do that and develop that, showing, exhibiting, collaborating, just growing the project in whatever way seems most relevant. It's based on what's happening in our communities, and it's based on people's interest, and the interest at least for the past 8 years has been fairly urgent, as many, many, many thousands of people have been coming home from military service and going back home to communities, and people are looking for creative ways to acknowledge and reintegrate and make space for dialogue around the complexities of those experiences. For both those of us at home and those of us who have served overseas. So it's if the urgency persists, then I imagine the workshop programming and the amount of workshops that we do will persist as well.
Great. And Drew, if somebody wants to get plugged into combat paper, let's say that I was interested, I just heard the podcast, maybe I'm not as creative, but it sounds pretty interesting to me. Are the people that are attending these workshops, are they already kind of more advanced as far as being the creative types, or do you find all different levels?
Yeah, I mean, the workshops are designed for the layperson. And what I mean by that is somebody who has zero art training or zero art practice. Because we're making paper and it's a craft, and because the process is fairly deliberate, it's easy to get into it. So most of participants are in that category, but inevitably along the journey, we meet people who are trained artists, who are in school for art, who are already have their own art practice and have a terminal degree in art, and maybe are professors now, and maybe are from Vietnam era and served in the infantry, like really beautiful encounters. So it runs a pretty big spectrum of those who participate, but it's totally open for whomever. Again, it's for veterans and the community. That's the part that I really want people to remember, is that friends, family, community members, spouses, children, all of us have something that we can relate to the military. So it's important for me, the veteran and the non-veteran, coming together in the workshop setting to be able to make paper. That's really important, because often all of us have a difficulty weighing in on what those various perspectives might be. And if in some tiny little bit, ever so slight way, through this process of making paper, we learn something new about each other or about ourselves, hey, job well done. I think that's super great. That's what I'd like to see happen.
Excellent.
So it's really open. And if you want to find us, we're easy to find on Facebook. Instagram is where I put a lot of prints up and pictures of process and stuff. And then what's the other social media main one? Oh yeah, Twitter. And then there's a website that has the workshop tour. It has more information on sort of articles about it, the history of the process, where we're coming from, all of that kind of stuff. There's hopefully the idea is that we're easy to find.
Excellent. And I will make sure to put all of those links in the show notes for the listeners to be able to find you.
Great, thanks.
And I just wanted to take that analogy a little bit farther, Drew. And let's say that I'm just hearing about this for the first time. How would I get plugged in with the organization and find out about the workshops? Or let's say that I jumped on the website or I jumped on social media and I saw, hey, there's a workshop going on in my area. I just send an email, or is there like an event form that you sign up for, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. Depending on the host, all of the relevant information should be on the website. Generally, workshops are free and open to anybody.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. And most often, like RSVP and all that stuff isn't really required unless the host specifies. And again, that would be on the details and links and all associated information with that on the workshop tour component of our website. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about this and why it's accessible and why I use that word is colleges and universities, cultural and art spaces, military institutions, lots of different hosting organizations have put up their support to provide these workshops for free for veterans in the community to come together. And so, hey, I mean, that's the trick. You want to make paper, all you got to do is show up, and everything you make, you get to keep.
That's great.
It's super great. I think it's a blast.
If somebody is just hearing about this and they look on your website and they find out that you have workshops in a bunch of different places, but not exactly where they are, do you take requests as well? If they say, hey, we have a group of 20 people and I'm sure we could find more, could you come out to wherever?
Right. I mean, and that's the hope between our 4 paper mills is we're able to meet that need. Sure. Hit us up.
Outstanding. Okay. I think we are ready to go into the final 3 questions. You ready, Drew?
Hit me up. I'm ready. Let's go.
Who would you like to hear on a future episode of Veteran Resource Podcast?
Well, I don't know if I haven't really talked about, but there's this really, really amazing project called Warrior Writers. And this begins my sort of delving into creative arts and group or workshop creative arts around my military service. And it's a facilitated creative writing program since 2006, working with veterans of all generations and all services, coming together and writing, but using as inspiration the writing from previous generations. So there's a huge, huge, amazing and beautiful archive of written works by war fighters, and going back to World War I is as far back as I've read, other than some letters from the Civil War. But that would be amazing to hear more about the work that they're doing. I think that would be awesome.
Oh, great. I will definitely check them out. Okay, question number 2. What upcoming project has you fired up right now?
Man, I mean, it's a weird thing to get excited about because it's war. But I've just uncovered a bunch of new images and new kind of explorations into the World War I stuff based on, there was this movement of artists after the war ended. So in 1924, so 10 years after the beginning of World War I, a bunch of artists created a whole new body of work. These are primarily German artists, created a whole new body of work to in a way, commemorate the anniversary of the beginning of the war, in part because they thought that its memory was changing. You know, sort of the reasons it happened or the impact that it had were sort of shifting in the national dialogue. So they created a bunch of artwork around it. And it's super powerful material. So I'm fired up about it in the sense is a lot of that history is just being unveiled to me in the past few months. And I'm now making, sort of synthesizing it my own way, making new images and work around it. So I'm very, I guess, honored and excited to be able to have that opportunity. Again, World War I is such a huge and lasting impact in our lives. I'm sent to fight in the country of Iraq, which was determined after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the end of World War I. So, it's directly related to my life, that's for sure.
Oh, wow. Okay, last question. This one is the brain stretcher.
Brain stretcher.
If you woke up tomorrow and you found out that somebody made an anonymous donation of $10 million to your organization, what would you do with the money?
Boom, let's do it. Sounds great. Are you offering?
Somebody out there just might.
That's crazy money, man. I don't know, $10 million? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is funding for all of the combat paper programming for like the next 10 years. That's probably what I'd do. I'd take care of the overhead. Boom, done.
Nice.
Yeah, so that, we could just do, that would pay for our way. It'd pay our fuel, it'd pay our rent, it'd pay our living costs, supplies and material, it'd pay for us to travel and provide workshops. We could buy all that new equipment we've been saving up for. Heck, I could even get a studio that was my own and turn it into where I could do workshops maybe every month. Boom, people coming ongoing for free. Yeah, I would do a lot with it. That's crazy money.
Very nice. Well, listeners, if any of you have an extra $10 million laying around and you're looking for a good place to put it, make sure you give Drew a call, and you just heard what he's going to do with it.
Right on. Sounds
really great. Well, Drew, this has been a very cool episode, and I thank you once again.
Mm-hmm.
So what'd you think? Combat paper sounds really cool, doesn't it? Imagine taking your BDUs that are probably sitting in your closet, collecting dust, and taking them and creating a piece of art with them by taking them and pulping them down first, and then creating paper with it, and then doing some sort of art on that paper. That's something that you could keep forever. You can pass that down to your children. And for people like me that are minimalists, that don't want to keep stuff around that isn't being used anymore, that's perfect. Perfect. You can find out all the information on Drew and combat paper at the show notes, which are at veteranpodcast.com/009. I'll make sure to put links for everything there, Facebook and Instagram and the website, so you can connect and you can find where one of these workshops is happening near you. Or Drew said that you could reach out to him if there is not a workshop near you, and maybe he could work something out. Also remember, this is for veterans and also non-veterans, and it's absolutely free. So make sure you take advantage of this opportunity and connect with Combat Paper. Also, don't forget to go and check out VAP Podcast. That's vappodcast.com/iTunes, and listen to what BR is doing. Let me know what you think. You can shoot me an email at jeremy@veteranpodcast.com, or you can head over to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/veteran resource podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you in episode 10.